Amelia, hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. I was wondering if you could start by just sharing where you're joining us today from.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight to be able to talk with you today and to be a part of your new soundscape and interview and conversation initiative. I'm joining from Gainesville, Florida. I'm not originally from here. I moved here to take this position at the University of Florida. I am Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, and I grew up partially in Oklahoma and also partially in upstate New York. We have Seneca reservations in both areas, and so I got to grow up in the basin of both, which is really beautiful and fun. And I'm excited to go to Oklahoma next week again to go back and visit. And also there's a film festival called Dead Center where my new film is premiering. So it's always fun to go back to Oklahoma in the hot summer.
I was wondering if we could begin our conversation, if you could just share a bit about yourself and how you came to your practice, however you describe it.
The first sort of artistic, like public-facing work that I did, I started when I was about 7 or 8 with my mother, who is a storyteller. She is a storyteller, both of our tribal nation, but also just broadly a storyteller who enjoys, perfecting her craft and traveling around the world. Storytellers have their own, networks and conferences and community, and she was part of the broader, more global storytelling sort of sphere, as well as being someone who was an official storyteller of our tribal nation. So with Seneca Cayuga elders, when they give you a story and you become a storyteller, it's a long process. You gain trust from the elders. They see you as a respectful person who is engaged with the community, is engaging with your language, is a good steward of the meanings and the stories and the truths that are within some of our historical stories. And when an elder gives you that story, it's your role not to tell it verbatim as the elder has told it to you, but to reinterpret it for the next generation. And to do so with each audience, so that if you maybe are presenting to an audience of children, you're going to slightly change the story to make it more relevant to them. Or if you're with a group of people who are facing a specific issue, storytellers may, as they their role in the community is, sometimes they may stand up in a meeting when there is disagreement with the tribal nation, or we're coming to consensus or a deep decision-making process, and they'll say, well, let us remember this story, and they'll tell it, and maybe in that moment they'll tell a very short version, maybe in other moments they'll tell an expanded one. So storytelling as a function, it is a part of our, Confederate democracy. It's a part of our peacemaking process. So when my mom would tell stories, part of our storytelling can be music. It can be crafts as well. So I would play flute and drum or sing while my mom told stories, since she is not musical, but loves to include the music. And a lot of the different types of music making are parts of the stories, where you may have the flute play at a certain part, talking about birds, the way that they sounded, or there are certain songs that go along with the type of song that maybe, a character in the story is singing at a certain time. So I would be her musical accompaniment. And from there, I got very interested in music, and I auditioned to study at the Eastman School of Music when I was 12, and I became a student of Seth and Jane McCoy there, who are both incredible opera singers. And I studied, primarily with them throughout my education at the Eastman School of Music in vocal performance. And I thought myself that I would be an opera singer, and that's what I would do with my life, and that's what I had trained and studied to do. And I went and worked in that field professionally at a very young age. And but I was so interested in making things that maybe had never been made, or connected the Indigenous perspective with some of these Western traditions of singing. And I started working with new opera festivals and creatives like artists and technologists to make new forms of opera. And I would find myself being one of the performers, one of the singers, sometimes then the composer. I became a composer, and sometimes a director. And as we started using more and more advanced technologies, or really hacking together what we could at that time, because this was kind of in the mid-90s, we were really hacking like robotics and glass slides and a computer that could barely play a graphic and real time, all these kind of things for live, exciting, immersive opera experiences. We would maybe get a commission like once every 5 years for a new opera festival. And I was very young and kind of impatient. And so I was like, great, I did this once. Now when do we do this again? And everyone's like, well, it takes a really long time to get a commission. It's like a 5-year wait cycle. And I thought, what am I going to do in between this time? And people started to approach me and say, hey, could you do something at our art museum or at our gallery? And I found that the art world had a much sort of quicker development cycle where I maybe didn't need 100 people in my opera to produce something. I could do something that was the version, like the personal version of having projections and music and live performance and I guess like a one-woman show. And people started calling me a performance artist or a transmedia artist or a new media artist. And I still thought I was kind of doing new opera forms, right? So I always say that I haven't really changed in any way my practice, but the name for what it is that I do has changed throughout time. Sometimes it's net art, transmedia art, performance art. Sometimes now, of course, people are talking more about AI when as a placeholder for any type of computational algorithmic thinking or process, whereas before it might have been emergent multi-agent theory with agents that are computational and real in real time, or audio art or sound art, right? And now the shorthand is like AI, which is great. And I have worked with artificial intelligence since about 2016 when I was a researcher and professor of art at Vanderbilt University. And it's been exciting to see the way in which artificial intelligence has changed. But from my perspective, I've been working at that intersection of computation, hardware, and live performance and art for a long time. It's just sort of like what people are calling it. But at the end of the day, the curators, the friends, the people that I've been making this with haven't changed. Like we're all growing and learning new things. And the institutions that have supported this work are still there and still support it. But oftentimes the framing around what it is that we're doing changes. But we're still doing that thing of telling stories with the types of technologies that are emerging that we find as humans great containers for the values, ethics, and dreams that we hope will lead us forward for the future generations.
Thank you so much, Amelia, for that really generous and beautiful telling of your story and how you came to your practice. Really loved hearing about the early days of creating with your mum, and it was really fascinating to hear you talk to your mum's practice as a storyteller. I'm aware that storytelling is a big part of your practice, and I was wondering what you see as the importance of story and the importance of story in your work.
I think that I have maybe a more abstract way of approaching storytelling, the way that a craftsman or an artist will approach the way that we have our stories. Like in my tribe, the function of a storyteller is really somebody who's using oral tradition to tell live stories that have a specific, beginning, middle, and end. And then the role of the artist, if you're weaving fabric, making clay pots, building masks, or building homes or beading, you kind of take it and abstract that, and you abstract the values into some of the patterns that we have are very traditional, but artists are always asked to kind of, memorialize, think, dream about new processes and bring those into the ways that we design. So I think of my process as different from my mother's in that way. Also, I don't have the official distinction as a storyteller, nor would I want to. I understand that our functions in the world are different. And her role as a storyteller, mine was using stories and taking the lessons from those stories. But there is this layer of abstraction that artists do as a way of taking something that maybe is time-based, beginning, middle, end, and maybe looking at that moment at all different angles in time. Sometimes I still do, a lot of my work is durational, a lot of it is video art, but its beginning and middle and end is almost in a looping fashion, maybe more quantum layering in that respect, or even in photographic process where you have this ability to see many images at the same time through different types of processes. So for myself, I am still inspired by a lot of our traditional stories, and I do think that the role of an artist is similar to that of a storyteller, where we are a part of our cultural conversation in our community. We're thinking about values and ethics. We're often pushing against cultural norms, expanding definitions. But the role of artists is slightly different than someone who is trying to bring something into a time-based narrative. We often push at the notions of what time is or what it could be. And I think that's important as a role for an artist.
I really want to come back to you on that conversation about time. But I also was resonating with what you mentioned just earlier about feeling that AI has become a placeholder for discussing a lot of what we'd normally discuss as computational technologies as a whole. I was really enjoying, when I was preparing for our conversation, listening a bit to a talk that you gave earlier at Stanford on AI and art and creativity. And I was really interested by one of the central questions you were asking, as I understood it, to inquire around the cultural narratives, values and worldviews behind our understandings of AI. And you had this great prompt, which was, what is the creation story of AI? And I was wondering if you might talk a little bit more to what you see as these sort of cultural norms and narratives behind the kind of dominant use of technologies that we're encountering today.
Maybe in some ways I'm living in real time the creation story of AI, just for the singular reason that as an AI researcher, at a moment when maybe public discourse, news, journalists are very excited to talk about AI, they will reach out to me and ask me for quotes. And so I have these daily conversations with people around the world who are asking really interesting questions. They're sometimes you think they're going to be the same, but they always, they'll send me the questions ahead of time. And then when I actually get into the interview, we're having a very unique and different conversation, and maybe it's specific to the country that they're in, or a news cycle or something that we're responding to. And I feel very privileged to be a part of that and feel as though I am watching and being a part of this creation story of AI. But there are certain fears that I continue to hear reverberated, or misconceptions, or even consensus that shouldn't even be consensus. And I'll give you an example of that where, maybe a couple, maybe like 7 or 8 months ago, when I was either giving talks or speaking with journalists, they would often refer to AI as like the AI, or like there was a singular AI. Like, when is the AI going to be smart enough to replace us? When is the AI going to be so super intelligent that it's like the end of humanity? Like, as if there was just like one company that was running one AI, and this one AI was going to have a singular consciousness. And that was an oddity to me, because I was like, that's interesting that you've already kind of laid down the sort of quest to maybe regulate or talk about or integrate AI within our culture, and just already assume that it's so at the bleeding edge that it's its own sentient being, which is wild, since right now it's just a lot of different developers at a lot of different companies and research institutions and coding groups who are all working on different aspects of, machine learning technologies and deep learning technologies and large language models. And we're all, it's just like any type of scientific research, really. Like, we all have a piece of it. We all have our specialities, and if you can get 10 scientists agree about anything, that would be incredible. But we do agree on certain standards, on certain norms. But that's why we have research, is because we'll say, okay, I understand what you're doing with your research, but I have a slightly different take. And it's no different with AI. And so I was kind of shocked, about 7 or 8 months ago, that suddenly people were thinking like, oh, we've already solved that somehow, and there's only one, and it's also, about to take over. We've moved back from that, I think, as more people in the public are able to start playing with some of these AI as a service, API-based interfaces. Like, oh, now when I ask my class, how many of you have used AI? And they're all freshmen. I teach a freshman class. And when I started teaching that class 3 years ago, a couple of students would raise their hand. And then last year, half the students would raise their hand. This year, all of them raised their hands. Like, they have all used ChatGPT at some point in time. They've all used Midjourney at some point in time. My students are primarily, engineers, but also artists and creatives and people that work in game design or game development. So they've all played with it. Why not? They have a browser. They can play with it. So there's no longer this notion that there is the one AI. They're like, well, what do you mean when you say AI? When I'm like, yes, this is wonderful. I'm glad that we're starting to get the discourse sort of away from that black box thinking. However, as soon as we have or grasp a concept of the research, again, we start formulating notions that, like, for instance, AI is only based in something that is like a GAN or a large language model. And that's also not true, right? So as soon as, and it's hard, science has always had this
difficulty that science is moving fast and it doesn't always bring the general public with it. And that's the very important work that science and art and creative educators do to help those bridges and to build those transitions to prepare the next generation to be scientists and leaders, but also to just help everyone to understand this so that we can have good policies and protections and a good civic society around our science. So it is really important that as we do research, we also make sure we are communicating the type of research with the general public so that we can have more input, more voices, and people can understand what's at stake.
One of the other points you made in this, in the talk that I was enjoying, you asked another really great prompt, which was around the kind of current imaginaries that we have around AI, or the current stories that we're telling around AI. And you really pointed to a lack of positive stories that we seem to be telling about AI, and then asked the question, why are we investing so much in something that we can't tell a good story about or can't imagine a good future for? And I was wondering where you see maybe the possibilities for different or alternative thinkings about AI, or alternative imaginations for how AI might be if we were to tell more positive stories about it.
I love to poll my students. We have I have a very large class. So there's about 130 of them, but I do these kind of interactive polling so we can really have a dialogue, because I want to know what they're thinking and where they're starting. And every month it's going to be different because of how quickly this field of AI is moving. And so I always want to know what their questions are, where they are at. And so when I first started teaching this class 3 years ago, I would ask students, tell me every single time you've ever heard a fictional mention of AI, whether it's a video game, a science fiction novel, all the stories you've essentially heard, like the creation stories, right, of AI. And we would put them all up on the board, and we would look at them in word clouds, like how many, people were interested in, and get all of them out onto this, interactive video image on the screen and say, okay, these are all the stories. And then I would say, how many of these do you code in a positive way, like where AI is the good guy, right? Or helpful in any way. And in the first year, it was 0. And then the second year, it was 1. One young woman said that she had read a book about an evil AI, but then these coders came together and were able to recode it until it was helpful. So it started out evil, but then it transformed into something that was good. And then this year, when I asked my students that same question, it wasn't the case. I saw we had about maybe 7 or 8 of them that were positive, and I said, okay, great. Who put these? Please talk to me about what story this is. And they are starting to see, I think, and understand. Most of the 7 or 8 that were positive were from recent television shows or recent news articles. Even much more of them were, okay, this isn't a story of fiction. This is a story that I read last week of how someone is doing, genomic research, or someone was doing water filtration, or identifying bird sounds, or tracking illegal poaching, right? And so the positive ones tended to be not fiction, but truth, but real news stories. And so that's an interesting evolution I've seen just in the last 3 years. And so I think, one, people are finding positive ways of using AI. And so those stories are just real, and people will maybe make fiction about those true stories, but the true stories often happen first. Sometimes in science fiction, they happen before. Maybe we'll see a bit of a reversal where truth will influence fiction rather than the other way around, which has been sort of the story of AI in the past. But I see a great amount of use for AI anywhere where you have large amounts of data sets that are difficult for humans to process it at a given time. So using I think I've seen a lot of great scientific research and white papers using AI for environmental sciences, for modeling the way that water systems work, or the ice caps and the ways in which they're melting, or understanding multiple sensor arrays and comparing them, or projecting the type of data that may happen in the future. So what all this means when it comes to positive is just, the ways in which science moves forward can always move forward in a positive or in a negative way. And so imagining having an ability to process data in new ways or make predictions in new ways, AI can be of help. And the types of sciences that depend on data are all of them, right? There isn't a single science right now that it doesn't use data in some way. Some of them just use larger data sets. We're seeing patient data that is, being historically scanned and processed in ways that that AI models can use for medical research. We're looking at it, of course, for preventative medicine and for vaccines and for medications. But I am also very inspired by the ways in which AI is used to model climate futures and to look at, predictive modeling around our water systems that are very complex. And when I gave a talk this year at GTC for NVIDIA, they talked a lot about a sort of digital twin they've created of the Earth with AI that is looking towards modeling weather patterns and weather systems. And that is a great use of AI to be able to imagine how different storms that start in one part of the world will affect within hours or minutes or seconds other places in the world. That's really valuable, right?
You have a beautiful artist statement on your website, and I'd really encourage anyone to go and read it. And I was struck by a number of things that you articulate in your statement. But in talking about how your main focus of your research is water, you have the statement, "I stand with those who defy categorization. We are prototyping just futures in places that do not exist. For people, they one day will be. For the liquid, the hybrid, the cyber, and the unreal." I thought that was a beautiful statement. And I guess also speaking here from SLV Lab, which is a prototyping lab, I was really interested in how you're thinking with or working with the idea of the prototype and what it means for you to be in the act of prototyping just futures. Would you be able to talk a little bit more to the role that prototypes or the act that prototyping plays in your work?
When it specifically comes to water, I started off by joining the Water Institute here at the University of Florida and just meeting and getting to know all the other types of researchers that use water in their work. Many of them are using artificial intelligence in their water research. Some of them are looking at it from medical justice standpoint, like they have found contaminants in the water that are put there from pesticides that are causing Alzheimer's in patients and trying to legislate and regulate and make people care about this and understand or stop using these pesticides. And then others who are modeling, future water systems for the ice caps. Others work with religious communities around the sacredness of water and making sure to include interfaith dialogue in the protection of waterways. So it's a very diverse institute that I'm a part of at the University of Florida. And I wanted to just meet everyone, talk to everyone, because I created a project called Talk to Me About Water, where we're a group of science researchers like U.S. Geological Survey data producers and designers, as well as artists and machine learning scientists and musicians. And we create artworks at museums, libraries, festivals, any place where we have a very large, diverse public audience. Part of it, we will do immersive performances, video installations, but we always do workshops. And the reason we do workshops is because, we're all obviously called Talk to Me About Water, and we want to talk to people about their water stories. We want to bridge that gap between Indigenous people who are experiencing the water crisis most acutely globally, centering their voices, connecting water research and water scientists' work. So that's that science storytelling part. And then bringing that into a way that is a plain conversation we can have with diverse audiences. So we'll create these workshops where they're open to the broad public, and we will talk about Indigenous voices and we'll talk about the scientific research. But most importantly, we turn it into a conversation. And then from all of the conversations, we have ways of sourcing the types of questions and answers that people have created in these workshops. And so because of that, we have this sort of data bank of about 500 conversations that we also use as part of our research to further the ways in which we talk about water. Something that I'm interested with this, collective, this group of amazing people called Talk to Me About Water, is how we might shift the tone or register. And again, these are kind of like musical thoughts, but the tone or the register of the conversation around our climate crisis. Because when you speak about climate grief and you speak about the climate crisis in a way that is turning up the fear, like the urgency is often what people have done historically. And I just mean in maybe the last 10 years or even 20 years, I guess, since maybe the climate activist work I've done in the 90s, it's been really around like scaring people that this terrible thing is coming or is already here or is just around the corner and you must act in some way, even though the way in which you might act, it really cannot be a solo act. It has to be something that's in connection, because something like the water system, it's not really just dependent on if everyone turns off their tap for 6 less seconds a day. It's actually like much more complicated than that, because the way contamination works, the way our water system works, it's not just about an individual action of one person. And so changing the tone, changing the registry of the way in which we talk is important, because we, through my great colleagues and science researchers, in the consortiums around universities around the world, have found out that by overwhelming people with fear and sort of climate catastrophe language, it does not help them make an action, and it does not help them come into community that can make larger impacts. And in fact, it usually overwhelms people and makes people feel as though they don't have a place within the movement, and oftentimes can make them feel frozen or overwhelmed, which is the opposite of maybe what you're trying to do if you're an educator and you want to inform and educate people and then hope that they take an action. By overwhelming them with fear and dread, you are making them paralyzed from making an action, which is not helpful. So we're interested in thinking of other types of registers that we can have these conversations that could leave people in a place that they feel educated and informed and empowered to make action, or empowered to know what types of actions fit within their lifestyle, and that they can feel like honored and proud of those types of actions, rather than ashamed or nervous that they're not doing enough.
Yeah, as you've mentioned, there is so much fascinating research that shows down how when we panic or feel any sense of urgency, it really shuts down our sense of appreciation or awareness of possibilities, or shuts down those abilities to find pathways to act.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm just watching it within these workshops. It's interesting. People will usually have the same maybe 5 or 6 things they start with. And they sound as though, because they're the same, it's almost like everyone, it's what maybe the public discourse is around water. They'll say things like, oh, we shouldn't use plastic water bottles, or I shouldn't use as much water. And then we'll say, okay, great. We'll talk to them after they get sort of that out of their system. Then we start talking about maybe their relationship to water, the first person who ever taught them to swim, how often they see water in a week. And as we establish like a personal relationship to water, people are able to start dreaming and thinking of ways in which they can participate, ways in which what they do is enough, how they can find a community and build a larger group that can have sustained movement, right? Rather than an individual like one-off action, they can be like, oh, I could become a part of a community where we would do this, weekly or monthly, which is much more like reasonable and expansive and inclusive for more people to join the movement, if that makes sense.
I was curious about how working with water, whether that's shifted or transformed your approach to your own art and technology practice.
I think in 2 ways. One, the same way that all of us have like special interests and hobbies, right? And so when you meet people who are into opera, they have like a certain way or certain other adjacent things that they're into, right? Maybe they're really into, I don't know, like flowers, right? And so you'll find, wow, that's kind of interesting that people are really into opera also know a lot about flowers, or birding, right? That's just kind of a side adventure. But it's the same with water people. I'll say that. It's like water scientists are hilarious. And you go to these water conferences. My sister is a water scientist for the USGS, and I will tell you that water people are my people. They are so funny. You go to a water conference and they'll be like, okay, everybody, we're starting the plenary session. And they're all just like floating around, and you can't really hear them because you heard like one and then all of them go into a different stream in the other direction. They're like very watery, and it's amazing. And the way they think, the way that they disagree, they're like incredibly hard to control. Like you can't tell all of them to think one way. They really are going to move their own way like currents. It's kind of beautiful and amazing. And I really love water people, and I love, continuing research and being a researcher side by side with them. Yes, I'm a weirdo because I'm an artist and a musician and, work in AI, right? And so all those things might seem odd, but to water people, they are very, they go with it. They go with the flow, and they don't see categories in the same way. They're very focused on their own specific part of the water story, but they know it's so interconnected. They are open in this beautiful way. So I love being part of the water science community, much in the way that I feel akin when I'm working with coders and specifically people who do AI research, I felt like, these are my people. I feel the same way with water people. And I was really happy to discover that. And so, of course, that affects my work tremendously because I've learned how they are in the world. And it also has changed a lot the way that I think about making my own work and collaborating with larger and larger systems. I love to create artwork that's part of larger projects. I'm working right now with the amazing Dr. Zarana Pringle at the Yale School of Medicine's Emotional Intelligence Center for Emotional Intelligence. And we're doing this long-term study around, creativity in the arts and its impact on public health. But we also started dreaming and thinking of ways in which we could research how people are making art with AI and what that has to do with emotional intelligence. And I love having my work situated within these larger spheres. Even though water is so large, I'm like continuing to be connected to even larger systems like healthcare, or thinking of how cities or nation states are engaging with software and with systems. So that for me is exciting as an artist, and it changes the time and the scope. There's work that I talk about that for me is what I call like quick and slow. And the quick work is something that I'm making on my own, that is expressing, like processing the ways that I'm understanding some of the scientific research. And then the slower work is where I'm working with hundreds of people or even 5 people, but we're working with really large, organizations or nation states or large policy initiatives around some of these ideas of AI or climate justice or the ways in which computation is affecting our public healthcare system. And those things are slower because we're writing grants and we're meeting with experts and we're moving at the pace of clinical studies. And, there's an immune system around those types of processes that they're slow for a good reason, because we have to make sure we aren't doing any harm and that we're, able to reproduce our work. And when at the end of it, we say that we've discovered something, it's based in, a really solid grounding of science. And I like the quick and the slow. And I think I will continue to work within that framework.
I agree as well. It's very easy to chart these things as a binary. I think technology, particularly sort of advanced technology fields, have often had these cultural biases towards fastness and quickness. But as you've pointed out, there's reasons why we go slow for so many good reasons when we're dealing with things that are of value or are precious or need to be kept safe. I'm always interested to ask technologists about what they consider to be technology. There's a Ursula K. Le Guin essay just a little essay of hers that I really love called A Rant on Technology, where she describes technology through her eyes as being the active human interface with the material world, and then goes on to sort of say, that I think I've got a quote here, we've been so desensitized by 150 years of ceaselessly expanding technological prowess that we think nothing less complex and showy than a computer or a jet bomber deserves to be called technology at all, as if linen were the same things as flax, as if paper, ink, wheels, knives, clocks, chairs, aspirin pills were natural objects, born with us like our teeth and our fingers, as if steel saucepans with copper bottoms and fleece vests spun from recycled glass grow on trees, and we just picked them when they were ripe. I was just thinking, with such a focus that we currently have on AI and AI development, and as you said, sometimes it's a very narrow definition of what AI is or could be. I was wondering if there's any other technologies that pique your interest, or whether you think there's a risk of, with this big focus that we have at this particular cultural moment in focusing on AI, whether there might be any other technologies we run the risk of overlooking completely.
I loved the examples in the essay. I would add to it another technology that I feel like it has become somewhat invisible is our way of forming consensus, peacemaking, and governmance, our democracy. All of those are technologies, right? Like there was a moment when they were built, and then there was a moment when they're perfected and changed and revitalized and reinvigorated or remade. And for me, I think the most exciting part of the story of AI that I want to be a part of is deciding what the system is for using AI in an ethical way, and that is a technology, right? It maybe will not include an algorithm, but it will include the borders around how we define the roles of algorithms within our daily rights. Maybe it's part of our digital human rights. Maybe it's part of lines that we decide where and when a machine does not go. Much in the same way we saw with nuclear proliferation agreements, that as soon as the technology was invented, we needed to invent the ways in which we decided we would not use this technology, or we would not, there was designed ways in which nation states came into accords of agreement and economies based on the ideas of when we would not use the technology and not just when we would. And that doesn't mean that I'm anti-AI, but I believe that we are also now designing that technology. And I think of it as AI and human thriving. So in the past, maybe those fields that are most similar or adjacent would be like human-centered computing or user experience design. But the limitations of those fields were such that we're studying human behavioral models, the way in which they interact and engage with software, and then determining the ways in which they can engage with software and technology in the most seamless way. It takes out the question of should that technology be used at all. And there are certain instances when we're seeing a drop in patient care or a drop in health outcomes because of a use of a technology. And so that question actually has to be a part of that process. It has to be like, okay, what is the health outcome, or what is the human thriving outcome that we want to see? And is this technology aiding them or distracting them or making people believe there's a system in place when there actually is not one? And so it's obscuring the problem. And in that case, how do we get the technology out of it and then find a human solution, and then decide, okay, maybe AI within this pipeline begins after the patient has done X, Y, and Z, or the user has done X, Y, and Z. And then at this phase is when it can begin and end, or this is the type of data that we want to use, not this type of data. And those boundaries are as important as the invention is also the borders and the boundaries, and where we find that its use is not helpful. We see that all the time in medicine. I always use that as, my sort of stock example, because no one would think it's crazy if I said, yeah, I don't think we should have chemotherapy pills at the, grocery store that any child could buy. I don't think anyone would think that was crazy. They'd be like, yeah, of course, you go to a doctor, and if you have been diagnosed with cancer and they determine that the treatment is chemotherapy pills, and they'll give them to your pharmacy and you will take them, or you'll take them under their supervision within the hospital. No one thinks that's weird. And yet, oftentimes when you talk about the borders or boundaries around artificial intelligence, people will say, oh, so you're just against it. And you're like, well, no, come on. Obviously I wouldn't be against chemotherapy if someone had cancer, that their doctor had worked with them. Maybe they got a second opinion. They determined that this is the best way towards their saving their life and having a healthy life and positive health outcomes. No one would think that's weird. So we do actually need to know when and where AI can be used for positive human thriving. That is not crazy to me. And I think many people in the world are seeing that is the case, and seeing the places where an unbridled sense that it just belongs everywhere can cause a type of erosion of civic trust, which is very dangerous to our society.
I really love asking the question of what good futures look like to our interviewees. And thinking about your work with artificial intelligence and art, I was wondering what you'd say a good future for artificial and art looks like, feels like, sounds like to you.
A lot of different metaphors have been used of how people are engaging and using AI in arts, and often people use phrases like a collaborator or a tool. I think of it a lot more like a protocol or a system, so that, working within a system, oftentimes artists will push and pull against it. I think a good system to compare it to would be money. There are artists who use money to make their art, and there's artists who use money as the topic of their art. They create work that help us think about different economies. They have work that makes us question inequalities within the economy and money, and it becomes a sort of lightning rod or a controversial take. I love when I'm teaching art to students, that often ask me things like, why is this painting worth so much money and this painting isn't? And those questions are really interesting and exciting to help them learn about what is art and what is value and what is culture. And so I think in the future, AI will be very similar. That some people will use it to make their work. Some people will use it as a thing to push against or talk about in their work. And others will ask questions as to why is this, AI so expensive and why is this one not, or why is this so available or computationally complex and this one isn't. And so I feel like in that way, it will be a protocol, a system, and an economy.
Thank you so much for your time in joining and talking with me today, Amelia. I feel like we've just sort of scratched the surface and we could keep talking for ages. But just before we wrap up, I was wondering if there's anything else that you'd love to talk about, or if there's anything coming up in your work that you'd love to share.
Well, I'm just so thrilled to be a part of this. And I went to Melbourne about 15 years ago to be a artist in residence at the University of Tasmania in Launceston. So I'm very sad I didn't get to come in person this time. And I really do hope that I get to return to Melbourne again soon. I met so many creative, incredible artists and technologists and thinkers there. It's just a wonderful place. So thank you so much for having me be a part of this. Upcoming work that I have is right now, I'm still kind of at the end of showing a new film called I Would Like to Be Midnight, I Would Like to Be Sky. And it's the first time I've made a more traditional, I mean, it's not very traditional, it's 10-minute experimental short, but it's traditional in the sense that it's like 16:9 and it goes onto a film screen at film festivals. And so it's been very fun this spring and summer going through the film festival circuit and it's very different than art museums and art contexts that I'm used to. So next week I'll be at Dead Center at Oklahoma, and I'm very excited to go and sit in a theater, which is really funny, and then seeing the film projected on a big projector with a live audience. And that it's been very fun this past spring and summer. So for those of you who are at film festivals, I think the closest that my film got to Melbourne was in Maoriland in New Zealand, which was a month ago. Very fun. So film festivals are new for me, but they're really fun and tremendous, and I'm having a great time with it.
That's amazing. All the best for your upcoming screening, and enjoy that film festival. Similarly, if you do come to NAM or to Melbourne, we would love to have you here at State Library Victoria. And thank you so much. It's been such a joy to speak with you today.